we all know that the history of Windham dates from March 16, 1811. It means that's drilled into our heads, and we know that that's where we began. Because that's the date on which the Alfred and the Messengers arrived from Becket, Massachusetts to what is now Windham Township. The history of Windham schools begins 4 months later with the arrival of a man named Alpheus Streeter, because it was in his home, less than 6 months later, that his daughter Eliza and her friend Rebecca Conant, the daughter of another settler, Patrick Conant, held the first class here in Windham. A few basic facts have come down to us over the years. They had somewhere between 12 and 15 students of elementary age. They taught alternate weeks, and they did not receive any pay. Unlike the schoolmaster over in Edinburgh Township, who was paid in whiskey. So that might account for some of the weird educational practices over in the southeast. The educational objective of these two girls was to teach the children to read and add. And that was all they intended to do. The sole textbook that they had in these first classes was the Bible. The young girls in the class were also taught handiwork, sewing skills, which were useful skills at a time and a place where there were no ready-made clothes, obviously. By the way, the Historical Society has a member, who's not here tonight, I was kind of hoping she'd come, but Patty Clayton, who was the secretary over the high school for many, many, many years, is a direct descendant of the first teacher of the school system, Eliza Streeter. So we do have a connection all the way back through the 200 years. The first school building, which was also the township's first public building, was erected less than a year later on Lot 86. And if you know anything about Western Reserve, you know that everything is built in squares and in lots. And so I'm going to throw out some numbers tonight, but they don't really mean much because I'll tell you where they were. Lot 86 is on the northwest corner of Mahoning Corners. Okay? Out there at the intersection, kind of Route 82 and Wyndham Parkland Road. That's where the first school building was built. At the time, there were 13 families living in the township, and they sent a grand total of 20 students to that first school. It wasn't free. The cost was 1 bushel of wheat for each term that the student went. It wasn't a whole lot of use for money in Windham at that time. Wheat was a lot more valuable than money was. The winter instructor was Dr. Ezra Chafee, who taught for 2 years until he married Polly Messenger and moved to Elmira. And that was, by the way, the first wedding in Windham Township. The summer teacher was Mary Ann Burchard. The school was wood, and it only lasted about a year. It was replaced by a stone building at that very same location very, very soon, less than a couple of years later. Now, the books that Dr. Chafee and Miss Burchard used were primers, the Bible, and collections of late Greek literature from antiquity and English literature. Now, this was the Romantic period in English literature. The great writers were writing at the time. William Wordsworth, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, Byron Shelley, those people. And the United States, at that point, hadn't developed any literature whatsoever. So it was no surprise that they were studying not only the British writers, but also the great Greek and Roman writers, too. Something that we don't even do in the schools anymore. So, these kids were getting a basic education, but it was an education based on some pretty deep texts. Now, that was a true one-room schoolhouse. And so the one teacher at any given time would have had to have 3 eyes and ears just to watch the work being done by one group, the recitations by another group, trying to maintain discipline over the students. And when I tell you how old the students were a little bit later, you'll know why they had discipline problems occasionally. Now, as far as funding is concerned, and excuse me, I'm just at the tail end of a cold and I'm getting dry mouth. In 1814, state law decreed that how local schools were supposed to be funded. The local school was supposed to be funded by taxes and donations. In 1827, the state passed a law that any householder whose tax was less than $1 had to pay $1, or if he had no money, had to donate 2 days' labor towards building and repairing schoolhouses. And as I was writing that down, I was thinking how much that would go over today in these levy votes that they have nowadays. If you voted against the levy, you had to help build the school. So one way or another, back in those days, they got you to do something. In 1831, the definition of a school-age child, and in Windham it had been this all along, a school-age child was between the age of 4 and 21. So, one-room schoolhouse. You had the age division of 17 years among those kids. Now, a little bit earlier, in 1817, Windham Township divided into north and south school districts. The southern district, as you can probably guess, was south of the railroad, what the railroad tracks are today. It was the arsenal. Now, we're going to keep talking about the arsenal, but as we know now, the arsenal isn't really part of Windham anymore, but it is part of our history. Well, school continued to meet both in the summer and the winter, and you can probably figure out why they had classes then. In the spring it was planting, in the fall it was harvest. And never ever forget that up until the 1940s, Windham was a rural community. Well, when I talk about the one-room schoolhouses in a minute, that'll come really into focus. The 1834 Academy is the next thing we got to talk about. In 1834, some community members formed an educational association, basically to afford a higher level of education than the grammar school basics that were taught as the educational standard. Now, kids could go to school until they were 21 years old, but there was no such thing as a high school. The highest level you could achieve by the age of 21 was an 8th grade education. What we would compare that to. Well, the Ohio legislature chartered this academy as a private subscription-funded school, and a 2-story building was erected on the village green. The first teacher was Dr. John F. Hopkins, and the academy had what we would call today a college prep curriculum. The instructors were recruited from very prestigious Eastern schools. A lot of Ivy League people came to Windham to teach at the Windham Academy, and several of the graduates went further east for their education, almost always in theology or medicine. Now, Windham has had 2 people come out of Windham who I consider nationally famous, and that is Civil War General and House of Representatives member Lord Woodworth during the Civil War. And then in the 1890s, psychic researcher Thompson J. Hudson, who was probably the best known psychic researcher in American history up to that time. That wrote, I gave a talk on him several years ago. Thompson Hudson wrote a dozen books on psychic research of all things. Both Woodworth and Hudson were graduates of the Windham Academy. So that was the kind of education that they were getting. Now, what we have up on the screen is a flyer for that Windham Academy. The original is at the Portage County Historical Society. It's printed on green paper, which is why you can't read a thing on here. I mean, you have to have it on a computer, you have to almost examine it with a microscope to read the words on it. But I've done that for you. So this is how they tried to recruit students for the Windham Academy. Arrangements have been made for the permanent continuance of this school under the management of Mr. Aaron Pickett, principal, and Ms. C.M. Williams, assistant. The academic year will commence the 3rd week of August and be divided into 3 terms of 12 weeks each. After the 3rd term during summer, there will be a vacation of 3 months. Tuition per term. For common English branches, $3. For higher English branches, $3.50. Languages, including French, $4. And incidentals per term, not exceeding 25 cents. A supply of all the books used in the school are kept by the principal to be sold at common prices. And this is the line I like. Students will find no difficulty in board in the village at reasonable prices. So we had students coming here from all over the place to the Windham Academy and rooming with the people who lived here in the village and the township. The trustees are happy in stating to the community that they have succeeded in securing the services of Mr. Pickett permanently as the principal of the academy, a young man who has devoted his life to teaching and who is already known as a successful teacher. They feel confident that under his supervision the school must be a good one, securing thorough intellectual culture, improvement in manners, and purity of morals. I'm looking at those guys from the 1960s in the back of the room and when they're having the purity of morals. They are also happy to say that Miss Williams comes to them highly recommended for having sometime been the principal of a school in New Jersey and during the past year of the female department in Kingsville Academy in this state. And the names are kind of familiar, names that we would recognize: Hiram Bingham, David Kingsley, W.W. Hinman, C.G. Frary, E.S. Spencer, and Edward F. Clark. Is that one of our infamous Clark family? We have one of them sitting in front of me. It's dated 1852. It closed the next year. The Windham Academy had lasted for 20 years. After it closed in 1853, it became the home of Perkin Higley, and eventually it burned. The Windham Township Hall, right over there, was built on the location of the Windham Academy. That was built in 1868. Please change the picture. Tell me if it's working. Do we have a new picture? Recognize it? I think it's the other side of this building. During the Civil War, the brick chapel, right over there, became a second Windham Academy, a tuition high school that included a night school with classes in singing, writing, grammar, and sponsoring debating and literary societies. Now, attending those debates among the students apparently was a major social function for this small farming community. Every Saturday night, they'd come down to the brick chapel and listen to the kids debate with each other. And you guys are missing the Cavaliers, and you could have been, going to the debates. 22 students were enrolled at one point, and over 100 students eventually graduated from that Windham Academy. But after the Civil War, enrollment declined. There's probably a good reason for that, which I've talked about before. 17 Windham boys died in the Civil War. So that was a large part of the possible enrollment for Windham Academy, and it closed after the war. 1853 was an important year in Ohio education. The state passed a new redistricting law mandating that school buildings had to be a certain distance from each other. Teachers were paid from state funds by that time. And in 1853, Windham Southern found itself with an awful lot of one-room schoolhouses. Next picture, please. Would you get a picture of a map? Okay. The one-room, now this is an 1874 map of Windham Township. And once again, I wish I could enlarge it more, because I've circled all the one-room schoolhouses. They were wooden buildings, they were literally one room, and they were painted red. We all tend to think of the one-room schoolhouses as white. They weren't, they were red. Although the ones that remained into the 20th century were often repainted in different colors. And after they closed, they became private residencies around the township. The township had 7 one-room schoolhouses shown on this 1874 map. So it would have been, since the next important date is 1883, this is valid from 1853 on. I haven't done any archaeological digs. That's for people younger than me. So I can only tell you approximately where those one-room schoolhouses were. Please forgive me if my names are off by a little bit, because I haven't lived in Windham since I was 21 years old. And I often identify people's houses, and those people died 30 years ago. So anyway, the one-room schoolhouses, there was one on lot 24, which was in the arsenal today, on the property of J. Wadsworth, which means that it was probably located at the end of what is today Wadsworth Road, which is up the hill, right, and take a left. And if you were able to go into the arsenal, you would have found that's where one of the one-room schoolhouses was. The next one was lot 37, which was in the arsenal. If you take the continuation of South Main Street into the arsenal, it was along that road in the arsenal. And since Windham was cut in half, it could have been as much as 2.5 miles into the arsenal. The property was owned by E.F. Jagger, which was an old Windham name. The next one is lot 40. It was in the arsenal on the property of somebody named Price, and it was approximately due south of where the American Legion Hall is. And once again, it could be several miles deep. The next one is lot 73, and this one we're pretty sure about. It's just before the Braceville line on Route 82 on the property of A.S. Rood, and that is where Mickey McGuire lived. Does Darrell own that now, or Cliff? Nobody, it's not the McGuire family anymore. That's where the schoolhouse was, right there on the corner, basically Shanksdown's Road, right? Okay, next one's lot 86, which was at Mahoning Corners, and that was the original one-room schoolhouse. It was still there. That stone building, it was still there almost half a century later. And lot 93, which is up. Does the word Camp Dussel mean anything to the guys in the back are going, yes, the people in the front are going, what? The first house in Windham Township was built out where Camp Dussel was located, at the top of the hill where whose greenhouse was out there? Rose's greenhouse. There's no greenhouse there, but there is, way back in the woods, a monument. Not a lot of people know that. The Historical Society had to get permission. The kids are nodding their heads. You guys know about the monument out there? Where the first house in the township was...
Are they the ones that shot it up real bad, maybe?
Oh, no. Look at those innocents. It could not be them. Anyway, the nearest road that I could find was Werger Road, which I have never in my life been on.
Stanley and Werger. Stanley Road, where Werger comes out on the angle. It was right in that.
I mean, I used to do bad things at Camp Dussel, but I never knew the name of the roads here. And finally, the last one-room schoolhouse was about 300 yards north of here. The property was owned by F.R. Alderman at the time. It was approximately where the Janicek's house is. Now, you notice that out of all those houses, that's Janicek's. There's no, well, we're going to see a Janicek in just a second. Who lives there?
Bird.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Maybe we can dig now.
Yeah.
But there's no house.
No, but there's a shell.
Okay. You notice that is the only school in the village. So that kind of tells you what Windham was like back in the 1850 to 1880 time period. There wasn't much of the village here at that point. A few stores by and large, but it was completely rural. And so only having one school in the village there was no problem there. Now, there did seem to be one other school, but it wasn't a public school. I found a really dubious map that said there was a school on the village square about where the Methodist parking lot is now. But that somehow it was connected to the Congregational Church. The teacher was Reverend Treat of the Congregational Church. And that he ran a library and school out of that. I've never been able to confirm that, although Linnea is sitting here nodding her head. But it wasn't a public school, as far as I can tell.
I can book it in public meeting.
Okay. Linnea always corrects me. No, Linnea always finds good information. All right. Now we're going to enter into the time period that most of you have at least some acquaintance with. Because the next important date in Windham schools is 1883. when centralization arrived. A large white wooden building was built at the corner of what is now School Street and Bower Street. It's Bower Avenue, I guess it's called. And there's a lot of people in this room that remember that white building. Children in the township could still attend their local one-room school for free, but township students who wanted to attend the new Windham Central School had to pay $1 a month tuition. Could I have a picture of the White High School, please? That's it. That's the White High School. If you lived in the township, you not only had to pay $1 a month tuition, but you had to find your own way to school, which means that basically all the students walked to school no matter where they were coming from. Whatever, they could be as much as 3 miles away and they were walking to school. Now, Windham had no high school at this point. They never had a high school. I've mentioned that a couple times. Students who graduated from a township school either went to the Brick Chapel Academy when it was open, or they paid to go to another local high school in a community which the state had designated as first class. Now, as the township population grew, especially south of the railroad in what's now the Arsenal, demand grew for a central high school. And when this was built, this was not a high school. It was the central school for Windham Village, but it was still an elementary school. But in the 3 years between it was built in 1886, this became designated as a high school, and it became known as Windham High School. It had its first graduating class in 1886, and I can recite the names of the entire class, and some of these are familiar. Joseph Angel, Luther Higley, Arthur Seymour, and Mary Seward. 4 people graduated from that first class, and Mary Seward, somebody ought to look her up and find out something about her because she's the first female graduate in Windham High School. In the 1900 census, all of the township schools remain in existence with one exception. The Lot 57 school, north of here, 300 yards from here, had disappeared because all the village students were now going to the central school. And another school appears at that time. So the population of the township must have been growing because they built one more one-room schoolhouse in 1900. It was located across from the intersection of Route 303 and Wadsworth Road. Up at the top of the hill is a large brick house. You all know the brick house up there? Come 100 yards this way and you'll see a patch of woods sitting there. Somewhere in that wood you'll find the foundation of Windham's last one-room schoolhouse, because that's where it was situated. Okay, so let's move into the 20th century. The next revolution in Windham schools comes in 1907 with the elimination of the township schools completely and true centralization. All the Windham schools now came to the white building on School Street. There was no longer any tuition. Transportation was provided in kid hacks. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard that term before, but a kid hack was a bus drawn by horses. And the kid hacks didn't actually last very long. By 1911, Windham bought its first motorized bus. But I'd like to show you what the kid hacks looked like. Next picture, please. Is that the kids in front of the school?
Yeah.
Okay. This is the 1907 Windham school's entire population. Every kid in the schools is in that picture. I studied this picture for a long time, and I discovered a couple of things that I really love. Next picture, please. Down in the corner is a jug-eared boy glaring at the camera. Can you see him? Looks like he's ready to punch the photographer. That's my grandfather. And my namesake, that's George Belden. So you can blame him if you're not seeing the Cavaliers tonight. Now there's other kids in the picture that are kind of interesting too. Next one, please. There's a little boy in that picture. I don't know how easy it is to see. Where is he? He's right there. doesn't even look like a face because he's pulled his turtleneck collar up all the way over his head. And the next picture, oh, stay there, stay right there. There's two girls, right over here's that boy. Here's the girls who brought their dolls with them so that they could show their dollies in the class too. Okay, next picture, please. Look, where are we? Yes, these are the kid hacks back here. This picture is from 1910. And this is the entire enrollment of the Windham schools facing, the photographer standing on the steps of the white school. And back, yeah, those are the school buses in the back. And those are not motorized, you can tell. Can you see the horses? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that's the end of the true kid hack here. That's what they look like.
George?
Yeah.
I questioned that. My mother, Louise Angel Shout, was called to school.
Oh my God, did everybody hear that middle name? Angel?
Yeah.
First graduate, Windham High School, Joseph Angel?
Somewhat related.
Okay, go ahead.
Francis Taft, my father-in-law, called my mother in a kid hat. And my mother was born in 1911. And I've heard the story both repeatedly from my mother and also from Francis.
Okay, and they went to Windham schools?
They went to Windham schools. My mother lived in the farmhouse on Windham Parkland Road where Olson's are.
Oh, your house? Okay.
Okay. Across, yeah.
Okay.
Across from Ferdy. Frances drove her, and I've grown up hearing stories. Robert and I both grew up hearing stories about our respective parents because my mother was very awkward, probably where I got it. And she kept falling down on her way out to the kid hack. And my husband grew up hearing stories about my awkward mother. And I grew up hearing stories about Frances. Now, she was born in 1911.
Go to the next picture. Now, I seem to have lost the picture somewhere. I had a picture in here of somewhere in there. Keep going back a little bit, and then we'll move forward. I had a picture of there. Okay, that's a kid hack where the teenagers have forced the kids out. So it's quite possible that my dates are off, mainly because most of this early research came out of the 1911 and 1936 Windham 25-year booklets.
Yeah, I've got
And, which May Curtis wrote a lot of that stuff. And so we're dependent upon her memory. So her dates may have been off a little bit. But
well, Mom and May didn't agree on everything. I tried to get her to write it down, but I haven't found evidence yet.
okay, Lena, go to the next one. And you've seen that one. Okay, that's good. We're going to come up with that one in a second. Okay, now, just to bring the one-room schoolhouse story to a complete close, the 1924 township maps show 4 one-room buildings still standing. In 1931, only 2 buildings are still shown on the Windham Township map. And on the 1951 map, all the one-room schoolhouses have disappeared. They're no longer on the maps. So those one-room schoolhouses were around for a long time, but they had been converted to other uses by that time. Okay. In 1914, a new addition was built on the 1883 White Wooden High School, but more importantly, in 1914, Windham finally got a first-class charter as a high school. Now that meant that Windham could start accepting students from other local areas around here, Freedom and other places, that did not have their own high schools. And that helped the Windham budget a bit. In 1927, that building that you see up there was erected. Now, We're bringing more and more people into this because that's the high school that most of the people in this, not everybody, but a lot of the people sitting in this room, that was our high school. That's the one we remember. That brick building was erected directly across what's today Bauer Avenue, directly across from the white schoolhouse. I mean, they faced each other. Before they passed away, I talked to a lot of graduates of people who walked across the street from the white high school. Huber King and Gladys Snyder were two of the ones I remember talking to. They remember the day they walked from the white school over to that school and entered a modern high school for the first time. At that time, Windham had what was called a 6-6 plan, which meant that 7th and 8th graders were considered high school students. Now, there was a good reason for this, because high school students were allowed to take home ec and industrial arts. And if you think about it, many of the students during this time period, we're talking 100 years ago, they didn't graduate from high school. Most of them, the Windham was still extremely rural. Most of them went through 8th grade, and then that was the end of their education. So by going to the 6-6 plan, they were able to get those manual arts, home ec and industrial arts, that they would need in life without actually having to be high school students to take them. So that was how Windham ran for a long, long time. What's important about that particular building, which was, by the way, solicited by a gentleman named Irwin B. Bauer, who was the superintendent of Windham schools at that time. That's why Bauer Avenue was named for him. And I knew I.B. Bauer as the Windham town clerk. I mean, I.B., when he left education, went right into helping Windham run until the day he died. He was a wonderful, wonderful man. His house sat on the corner of South Main and Bauer Avenue, basically where Mr. Eisler has his office today. That's where his house sat. And that was there into the 1980s, I think. Okay. Now, what's really important about that building, though, is that it had the first gymnasium in Windham history. And until that building was built, Windham couldn't have a basketball team because there was no gym in Windham. So, finally, Windham got to have basketball teams. In 1929, Windham fielded its first girls' basketball team and its first boys' basketball team. Within 3 years, the girls' basketball team was probably the best team in the state of Ohio. It was the northern champion. There were no state tournaments, but they lined up a game against Twinsburg, which was the other undefeated team in northern Ohio, and they whipped them. The boys' team, on the other hand, lost every game for their first 5 years. In fact, one of their games, a 92-5 loss to Manaway Village, remains the most lopsided basketball game in the history of Portage County. So if we have any girl basketball players in here, don't ever let any guys sneer about the game you play. You guys were there first and you were better. Okay, from 1928 until 1940, Windham remained a very quiet little town. I've talked a great deal about those times, that time period, in some of my other talks about sports. That was the period when girls basketball dominated the athletic scene around here, drawing literally crowds of thousands of people over to Kent State University to watch their tournament games. But Windham was still a rural community, and all of that changed in 1940. Of course, when the government came in and basically took half of Windham to build the arsenal, they appropriated Windham High School for an entire summer, moved in basically a corps of engineers, took over every single classroom, and sat there and planned out the arsenal. And the beginnings of the Ravenna Arsenal, the housing project began. Now, there were other housing projects. I'm not sure everybody knows that. Windham had a housing project. There was one in Newton Falls. I think there was one in Warren. But the one in Windham, being in such a small community, caused an enormous change in this town. In the decade of the 1940s, the population of Windham grew 1,000%. Before the Arsenal came, the population was about 300. And by the time the Arsenal had passed over into civilian hands, the population was between 3,000 and 4,000. So even National Geographic did a story about Windham, the population boom in Windham. Well, in 1942, how this affects the schools is that with the enormous influx of Arsenal workers, they were bringing kids with them. These were basically young workers. They had families, and they had to have a place for their kids to go to school. And remember, Windham at this time has only the white wooden building and the new high school, which was by that time 15 years old. So a new building was constructed. Paulina? One, yeah, that's it. Is that it?
That's a great school.
That's the grade school, right. That's it was built on Maple Grove Road. And this is the first elementary school that most of us went to. Dorothy, did you go to the school? No. Where did you go to elementary school? You went to the White Building. Okay. I mean, Dorothy's such a survivor. I mean, she's living history here. I mean, she knows things that I will never know. And I'm just always glad. 20-second aside. I have a picture on my computer of Dorothy Clark, a beautiful, ravishing young girl, sitting on a beach, staring up at a young man who's wearing an all-too-brief, Speedo-like swimming suit, looking up at him with adoring eyes. It's my father. She could have been my mother. Am I making this up? No, I'm not making this up. And this was built on Maple Grove Road in 1942, and later became Windham Central Elementary School. Lena claims that it was called Maple Grove Elementary. Is that right?
Yes.
And then eventually it became Captain Thomas Elementary. This was the building in which people like Julia Swigert, although Julia was in the White Building, the 1883 building, and Julia taught my hand. So she had, but the legendary Windham Elementary teachers taught that. Yeah, she went, yeah. Okay, now that building was demolished in 2003. Do we have any softball players here tonight? Okay. That building sat in the outfield of your softball field. So whenever you're running around out there, that's where I went to school. So that's what's left. That footprint is still out there. The next thing that happens in Windham schools is in 1953. Two important events happened. First, there was an addition to that 1927 brick high school, which doubled in size. If you ever get a chance, we have a complete collection of Windham yearbooks in the front room. Go in and pick up the 1953 speedometer, and you can see construction pictures of Windham High School's addition in there. I didn't have the book with me, so I couldn't make a slide of it. But there are pictures of the high school being built in 1953. The addition of the high school. Now that would be the wing of the high school. The original high school would have ended where the high school office was. Okay, the gym was there and everything, and then the rest of the building to the right of where the high school office sat when we went to school was the addition. Superintendent R. Brown Jenkins traveled to Washington to lobby for the funds to pay for that. The athletic team, the athletic area that we now know, you girls will understand this, the Barney Hill Gymnasium was constructed that same year on the site of the former six-man football field, which ran east and west, starting at what is today Bauer Avenue and ending basically in Charlie Curtis's cow pasture. Next picture, please. I am so proud of this picture. This is the 1942 six-man football backfield. This is Frank Janicek. I believe that's Don Miller, am I right? Yeah, and I'm not sure who this is. But what's important about this picture, and I've been looking for this picture for years, and finally one of the Janicek children gave it to me, is it over here in the corner, you can see the one high school. So that proves that the original football field for the six-man ran this way. Okay, from Bauer Avenue, which is right there, all the way to Charlie Curtis's barn. Well, that's where they built the gym. So at that point in 1953, the football team had nowhere to play. Windham was playing 11-man football by this time. So in 1953, the current football field was also built by Leo Cott and a whole lot of community volunteers. And despite that fact that they had no football field, Windham won its very first Portage County Conference 11-man football title that year. They played every single game on the road and won the league championship. So that's why whenever I have my sports talks and I talk about that 1953 team, they were just amazing. And there was only 19 boys on the team, too. That's what's even more special. Okay. We got the picture of Frank and the White High School. And once again, I'm really happy to have that picture. Okay, in 1953, something else happened. It was a big year. Windham left the Portage County school system. Now, you kids, any of you ride the school buses, look at the side of the bus and it says Windham Exempted Village Schools. There aren't a whole lot of schools like us because the exemption, which was a designation that was basically a tax advantage for Windham. It helped us financially, but it cut us off from the Portage County school system. Okay, it was a trade-off. And it didn't work very well because the state legislature, 1 year later in 1954, rolled that back. There were no more exempted village schools. And there's only about a dozen left in Ohio who still cling to that designation because it still helps us financially. But the rest of the schools in Portage County are basically coordinated by the Portage County School Board, or the Board of Education, not Windham. We are exempted from being controlled by the rest of Portage County. Okay, everybody loves independence, except athletic directors. When we went and it became an exempted village, the Portage County Conference kicked us out. They said they didn't want to have anything to do with us. You want to be free of us, we're free of you. So for the next 4 years, from 1953 to 1957, Windham had to schedule whoever they could. They had to scrounge around northern Ohio to find athletic opponents. Which was a real shame, because I'm sure the guys in the back remember those teams from the middle 1950s. They were some of the best teams that Windham ever had. We had undefeated basketball teams, and once again, we weren't even playing anybody in Portage County. We were traveling everywhere to play. And it was a horrible situation. So anybody who anymore wants to leave a conference, we're in a conference right now which is kind of spread out everywhere. And I've heard people talking about leaving that conference. I hope it never happens. because being an independent is dreadful. I'm preaching here. In 1957, Windham's role as an independent changed. Leo Cott, Ed Perlwitz, and a few other people created the Tomahawk Conference in 1957. If you go to the gymnasium, ladies, and look at the gym, you'll see a banner hanging in there for the Tomahawk Conference. It was the smallest conference in the state of Ohio. There were only 3 teams, plus we've got enough for basketball. We've got some people sitting in the back of the room who actually played in the Tomahawk Conference, but that's what saved us from independence. And then in 1961, Portage County came to its senses and invited Windham back, and that's when the Portage County League began. They were the Portage County Conference until 1961. So, anyway, Windham came back into an athletic conference in 1961, and if you want to know more about that, you're going to have to buy the book. Because I finally decided that this is the year I finish the book. So, it'll be on the first 50 years of women's sports history. So, it'll be in print, and then I can put that on. Okay, the modern era of Windham education began in 1959. In that 1 year, East Elementary was built on Belden Drive, which, despite her claims, was not named after Helena. It was named after my great uncle, who sold his cornfield to the school system at quite a profit, I understand. He never had to worry about money, I would never forget it. And at the same time, demolition began on the old White High School. Next picture. Okay, we got East up at the top. Okay, East Elementary. I went my first 3 years to the White School, and then I got to open that building. And I was there from 4th, 5th, and 6th grade. The White building was torn down, and I actually helped with that too. Tom Horvath, of all people, was hired to tear that. That was in the days before asbestos and things like that. And Tom Horvath did a Tom Sawyer thing to Joe and I, and he invited us to help knock down wood and everything, and have fun all day long. And he got paid for tearing that White building down, and we did all the work. And the old White building at the very end was a middle school. As I said, Lena and I were the last ones who never had a class in the old White building. So the class of 66. You went there, didn't you, Nancy? You went to the White School for the White building school. And I don't know how to describe the inside of that, because I wasn't there until I was destroying it. So, but it lasted, think about that, it lasted for almost 70 years. And it never burned down. I mean, that was the amazing thing.
Falling down.
I also have another picture that I should have brought of the 1917 Windham football team practicing by the fire escape of the old White building. And it's an incredible picture, and it's no wonder they gave up football. Because 2 of my uncles are on this team, and they just looked terrible. But they've got their knuckles down in the snow, and remember the fire escape over the side? So you can see that very clearly in the background. So maybe the next talk I'll figure some way to work that in. In the 1980s, a junior high addition was built onto the high school. Okay, the high school that most of us remember. They built a junior high addition onto that. Now, in the 21st century, we've seen building of a brand new school with a large infusion of state funding. As I recall, we were one of the first 10 schools in the state of Ohio to get all new buildings. And the school that I taught in for 30 years, Maple Heights High School, was finally torn down. It was older than the 1928 Windham High School. It was torn down 3 years ago, and Maple Heights is all new schools, and it was done exactly the same way. The state said you pass a levy for, I think, about 40% of the cost, and the state covered the rest of it. And that's basically how Windham schools were financed. The new Captain Thomas Elementary School was constructed. Do you remember the year on that? By any chance?
2000, we moved in, Christmas 2000, we moved in.
Okay. East Elementary obviously still remains, but because of economic factors, we lost it. It became, the county rented it for a while.
The church bought it.
Yeah, the church eventually bought it, but it was rented to the county
Yes.
as an alternative school
Yes.
for a few years, and now the Renaissance Center is a gem of a thing for a small community to have. That's what East Elementary has become. I walk in there and it just feels like home, but it's, you know, it's not a school anymore. So that brings us today, where do we have the, oh, that's, next one please, Nina. That's today. And that's what these kids sitting out here are going to remember as Windham High School. I mean, we all have a little bit of each one of these schools that we carry around with us, but this belongs to them. And Windham still remains one of the smallest school systems in the state of Ohio. And I say that with pride. I think most of us would agree that this has never been a problem in our lives, the education that we've got from Windham High School. The sense of community and the spirit that Windham has offsets any small advantage that the larger school systems might. So we don't teach Latin. So what? You know, we have a whole lot more going for us here in Windham than learning in a class like that. So we've been here for over 200 years, and it's my hope that we're going to be here for a lot longer. And that's the